Hello, my name is Darek Wedrychowski, and I wanted to say sorry once again for all the technical problems. Until yesterday, everything was okay. Unfortunately, today I had a great time in Berlin. It's a beautiful town, especially the nature in the park, in the garden by the palace. But once I started working again on the presentation, everything went totally down.
Welcome to Berlin.
Yeah.
That's how we do it. Walls,
We'll make two short presentations today. We'll make the presentation about dynamic forms shorter and do another presentation about Next. Like I said, my name is Darek. I'm currently not working in a company. I'm working on my own startup, which should hopefully show up sooner or later. My plan for life is to write video games for blind people. I hope that some of you or your friends will enjoy what I do. Another thing I wanted to show you is Tour de Vue. Tour de Vue is an idea that came just a week ago about creating a traveling blog which would focus on going to Vue.js conferences like Vue.js London or Amsterdam and to local meetups like this one. Of course, I'm not going to always be the one making the presentations. I hope to write about people I meet on this meetups, about better or worse adventures I had on the way. Starting with Prague, where on the way home I was offered a job. Unfortunately, it was 3 a.m. in the morning in a pub. And the only problem was that this job was not for Vue.js but for React.
Yeah, I also got a job like this, and it was not React.
So after I introduce myself, let's introduce the real hero of this presentation, which was supposed to be presented today. But stuff happened, and I won't be able to show you the actual code of the library I'm working on. This is why we'll focus more on theory and on existing libraries and useful patterns that can help you on working with forms.
Timing's everything.
There was supposed to be hello, how are you in German, but it was on a smaller laptop, so it didn't fit here. If you don't recognize this lovely lady, that's a queen of formix. Formix is an alien species that looks like insects, and similarly to insects, there may be millions of them around the world. The workers who are always looking for resources to extract, the warriors who are looking to conquer a new world. But even with millions of them, they don't exist on an individual level. They work together as a hive mind, which is controlled by the queen. And whatever the queen thinks of happens in an instant. All the hive behaves according to what the queen thinks of. And that's exactly how I imagine forms in JavaScript libraries should work. whatever the developer finishes his grandmaster plan should automatically happen in all the form. If the developer wants to show yet another field in an array, it should just happen without the developer actually having to write any code for that. We won't be showing actual code of formix, but I hope next time we meet the library will be already released officially. I wanted to ask you, how many of you actually worked with any libraries that help with writing dynamic forms? Or any form library for Vue.js? How many of you use a validation library for Vue.js? A bit more. Dynamic forms, which are either based on schema or on classes or objects that provide help for the developer, are useful in multiple cases. The most important case are CMSs, content management systems, which are basically form after form, and such forms have to be kept in the database. Of course, you cannot keep the actual HTML in the database because it wouldn't allow you to dynamically change it. That's why people instead are keeping a JSON schema of such form, which is a JSON representation of each field in the form. And nowadays there are multiple libraries that help to not only represent the whole form so we can keep it in the database, but also help with presentation of these forms. There are multiple such libraries for Vue.js, but I wasn't really fully happy with any of them. That's why I started working on my own one. Let's start with validation libraries. Actually, I'm happy with both of them. These are two most popular validation libraries in Vue.js ecosystem. vValidate is slightly more popular for one reason. Vue.js started its big career in JavaScript world primarily because it was supported by a Laravel community. And since the validation schema in vValidate is based on Laravel, it quickly became very popular among PHP developers. Laravel schema for validation and vValidate schema is based on strings. Usually, when we work with validation in JavaScript, we use either objects or objects. I'm sorry. Functions or objects. Strings in vValidate. Okay. So that's the difference between vValidate and Vuelidate. Vuelidate is closer to actual JS ecosystem because all the validators are represented as a function. You can add individually every validator function to your project and import it to your module and simply use it in your form. Another difference between them is that vValidate operates in a template. It uses it uses directives and attributes to tell the component what exactly vValidate wants from it. While VueLidate uses a separate option. How many of you know what is a custom option for Vue.js component? Each of highest level features of Vue.js component are so-called options. So we have data option, we have computed option, methods. They are all represented under one object called options, and we can use actually this object by requesting in our templates $options. We'll get all the representation of whole component schema. Additionally, we can create our own options. Many libraries use this feature. Good examples are integrations of popular backend frameworks. For example, Firebase, Vue Apollo also uses such an option. Vue Meteor, and also validation libraries can use it, like VueLidate. Personally, I prefer VueLidate. That's why I went with VueLidate as a base of my as a validation provider for my library. But as we'll see in a moment, many form libraries prefer to create their own schema for validation and not use one of the existing ones. Let's start with libraries that provide state management. There are two of them that I'm quite happy with. Both of them are written by users of official Vue.js chat. And one of them is a member of a core team of Vue.js developers called Egoist. How many of you ever used one of the libraries or projects used by Egoist? Because he wrote, I think, quite a lot of you. He wrote, I think, about 600 of them already.
So probably yes.
Yeah, actually, the guy's hobby is to create every day new library for whatever comes to his mind. So one day he decided to write a state management library for the forms. And why I call them state management libraries? It's because they are not full-fledged generators for form schema. They only provide some common features that developers can use to get rid of most common boilerplate in their forms. As you can see, one of them is based on Final Form. Final Form is a front-end agnostic library, although it's the most popular in React ecosystem. One of the smartest ideas of Final Form is that all the state management in this library is subscription-based. And we will show later an example of how such subscription works. The main idea behind subscriptions is that when you look at the actual components template, you don't see any attributes or props passed to the component, because all the passing of the props happens on a separate level, and each form component for a particular field subscribes to the main object that keeps whole data about actual form. Simple form is based on forming, which also is popular in React ecosystem, but even author of simple form, who wrote his library some 2 months before final form, said if Egoist wrote final form before I started, then I wouldn't even start it. But both of them are, even if you don't use them, both of them are very good sources of inspiration and great learning material for interesting patterns that you can use in your libraries. Viewform Wizard is another library written by user of official Vue.js chat. How many of you are users of Vueland? Then I warmly invite all the rest of you to official Vue.js chat. It's available at chat.vue.js.org, and we've got a lot of different rooms where we try to help. All the people who come with questions. And we also have a language channel, so there's a separate German channel. If you don't want to speak English, you can always speak German.
Or Russian. Or whatever.
Yeah. Viewform Wizard is different than all the rest of the libraries, because its primary use is for creating multi-step forms. Some of the UI libraries like Vuetify also provide such systems, and they are most commonly used in enterprise applications and on production lines. For example, if you want to send a package to another country through some company, there's one person who packs, one person who has to weight the package to know how much the package will cost, and all of that is handled through different steps of the same form. I recommend you this library. And let's go further, because I'm sorry, I'm very stressed because of the delay. So you can see now that I'm trying to rush it a bit. Viewform generator is at this moment the best maintained library for the forms in Vue.js ecosystem. It's got 2 years of constant upgrades. One of the achievements was dropping the size of the bundle from around 1 megabyte to only I think right now it's something like 30 kilobytes, so it's a very big change through all the 2 years of writing this library. It's got quite a big team, and the best thing about this library is that it's really production ready. So you can be sure that if you start using it, you won't get many problems. What I didn't like about this library is that it isn't really flexible. First of all, it provides templates for the forms, but they will always look like Bootstrap. If you want to make them looking closer to, for example, material design or something else, or if you would like to use them in, for example, native script, you won't be able to. Also, what's interesting about this library is that they didn't decide to use either vValidate or Validate. They wrote their own validation, which is fine, but people coming from wider ecosystem will have to learn it. Other form generators are not as big, and they didn't really get a lot of success. Vexform was based on really great ideas. I had high hopes that it will be a library that I will personally enjoy using, but it was quickly dropped, and by now it basically serves as a great source of ideas about how you can write your own form system if you want to make it truly dynamic. Let's leave the existing libraries for now, and none of the libraries I mentioned actually use so-called JSON schema. JSON schema is a standard some of you may be familiar with, because it's quite popular in wider JavaScript ecosystem, also on the backend, not only in Node ecosystem, but some Python libraries or Rails libraries, PHP libraries actually use JSON schema as a common standard that can make it easier to integrate multiple libraries. Because when you have different validation schema on the front end and on the back end, then you have to write middlewares that will translate one system to another. That's why vValidate library became so popular among Laravel users, because they simply didn't have to do much. They could use it with the same forms that they use on the backend. But somehow, even if it was considered a standard and highly pushed to use as a standard, actually currently new libraries don't really follow this system. One of the reasons for that is that the JSON schema system was invented to provide a way to represent some JSON data. For example, a schema, a validation schema, or form schema. And if you want to write really good forms, you also have to care about presentation, how these forms will behave on the screen. For example, for accessibility, if these forms will be accessible for people who have problems with eyes. And that's why even the libraries that are using JSON schema still break away from this schema, because they cannot fit all the use cases of these libraries in this closed standard. That's why if your company tells you one day we're going to use schema from now on for writing our forms, and we want to go with the standard one, just tell them no. Because okay, there is a standard, but the standard is very, very closed. So a lot of the ideas you will get simply won't fit the schema. Originally, I planned definitely too much of the content. When I thought about it at home, I realized that the whole talk about writing a dynamic forms library from scratch was rather material for a few hours of workshop. So let's just quickly go through most common issues that we can have writing dynamic forms, and
Can I ask
let's yes.
I still didn't get the point what dynamic forms are and why you need JSON for this. I don't understand this.
Yeah, that.
What's dynamic form? What's about this dynamic and why you need JSON for this?
I'm looking for. Yeah, we don't have. I'll gladly write the code here, but imagine we have a form here.
Yeah.
Imagine that you want to buy tickets for a plane.
Okay.
So you make an order, but you don't want to go alone. You have two kids, so you want to order tickets also for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a field, usually a checkbox or.
Okay. Dynamic means in context of the
yes.
input of the user, there are added some
User will press the checkbox on the field, or write, for example, I've got two kids, and suddenly, dynamically, the form will change. There will be added new fields,
okay.
or some of them will be hidden. For example, if you write that you're from particular country, there will be question: do you have a visa?
Okay. So the dynamic means some elements are added during the input of the data. Okay, but why you need JSON for this? Why is JSON so important and related to this topic?
JSON.
I know what JSON is, but I don't understand why you need for forms JSON. Except the data you send back and forward.
Sorry, may I intervene? I would move this to the end of the talk so that we finish the talk and then we can just discuss this piece again. Otherwise it would delay everything.
I'll answer in 15 seconds and
yeah,
we
sure,
can move on. Okay.
Okay.
On the front end, we don't really need JSON because we work with actual JavaScript. But on the back end, you need to have a way to actually represent the schema from the front end, so you can keep some schema in the database.
I don't get this because my form is on the server. It's in HTML. Why you have to save the form in the database?
Can I answer the question?
Yes.
You need only one field. Why would you build several components and several fields for just one type of field? So you can just put all the data on
so it's a dynamic added fields.
Yeah, but because you only have
if you don't hide them in
JSON,
HTML.
no.
Okay,
In JSON you put the title of the field, the structure of the field, and then you load it, only one field, only one component, and you just put all the data on the JSON file.
Okay, No, I
So you
understand.
don't
Okay,
need
so you
all
have
of
to
that.
save anywhere the
I say JSON.
additional fields and you, okay, I got it. Thanks.
That's the concept of the schema. Schema represents whole form. Each object in an array of components of the schema is actual representation of actual form, actual form field. I planned here. I planned in the. Sorry, a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For a while, let's talk about writing JavaScript libraries in overall. Because if we would like to write a library for the forms, we would obviously need to know how to write Vue.js library. I wanted to talk about the library I'm writing, but since I don't have the code with me, I can only talk about the architectural decisions. In my opinion, there's one optimal way to write big Vue.js libraries and for forms. Okay, let's drop it. How many of you actually wrote the Vue.js library? A few people. What did you use to bundle this library? Webpack or Rollup or something else? Poi. Poi is a library created by Egoist, of course. And another one is called Billy. Billy is a bit inspired by Poi, but Poi is not really a library for creating libraries. You can Poi originally was an idea. Poi originally was a competition to all the Vue.cli. Now we have Vue.cli 3, which was widely inspired by the architecture of Poi. So many new concepts that showed up in the new Vue.cli, which was released a few days ago, are actually inspired by Egoist library. And another library which I wanted to shortly tell you about is called Billy. Billy is specifically meant to be used for Vue.js plugins and libraries. Many people who come to our chat ask us, I want to write a Vue plugin, I want to write a Vue library, but I'm trying to make it with Vue.cli or other tools and it's not working. So the best answer is just use Billy. Billy is made with a rollup under the hood, but it's working a bit like Parcel. Parcel is a third big bundler for Vue.js, for JavaScript. And the main idea behind Parcel is that you basically don't have to write an configuration, because everything you would want to think of is handled under the hood by the library. So Billy provides similar user experience for Vue.js libraries. Like I wrote here, Webpack originally was created for bundling web apps. They didn't really consider people using Webpack for bundle libraries. But Rollup from the scratch was written with primary idea to help libraries. One of the big differences between Rollup and Webpack at the beginning was that Rollup provided tree shaking. Do you know what tree shaking is? Okay. Now Webpack caught up mainly, but because for a longer time Rollup had an advantage with that, many tools that are meant to help library developers are now using Rollup under the hood. With Billy, basically all you have to do is write one single command, which you can put to package JSON. You just write Billy and provide formats which you want to be bundled. I listed three main formats here: CJS, AS, and UMD. The difference between them is CJS, which is common JS, should be used if you plan to release your library on NPM and use it in your node modules folder. But once you upload your library to NPM registry, automatically your library is uploaded to ANPKG. Yeah, ANPKG, which is a CDN that you can use to just import your library directly to your project in the browser without using any build tools. So if you use build tools for your project and you plan, then you should provide common JS bundle. The third bundle, which I mentioned here, which is represented here as ES, is the ES6 bundle, which is just ES6 JavaScript module, and the difference between it and the others is that if you want to provide support for tree shaking in your library, you will have to use ES6 bundle. Once you start working on a library, you need a so-called entry file. Here's a simple example of such file, and it doesn't fit on the screen because original laptop was a bit smaller.
Just go in full screen mode maybe? Should be F11.
Yeah.
All this.
Ah.
No.
No, still.
Control minus.
No, it doesn't change anything. That's interesting. What is this?
Yeah, that's problematic. I think that's the problem with Eagle.js. Eagle.js is a Vue.js library which was created for writing presentations.
So we should file definitely.
That's an example. That's an example of how such presentations work, which is a bit problematic in this case. Okay, so in our entry file, we of course import the stuff we want to use, but notice that in our plugin we don't really use any mixing. That's because mixins, if using a plugin and you usually use when you install a plugin to Vue.js library, using the command vue.use plugin name. Vue automatically searches the library for install function. That's why we have this install function here. There are two arguments. First is whole Vue, and second are options. In our case, there are components because we want to globally register some components. But if we try to globally register a mixin, this mixin would be available in all components throughout the whole project. Usually you want to prevent it and simply import the mixin and use it on the component level. So we get all the components from the that we want to be used by such library. In this particular case, it will be form field components for each form type, like text, like password, or time picker. And what we don't see here what we don't see here is export statement, which we export a single object with all the content we want the user to be able to use. So we export our mixin, we export our plugin. We don't export a single install function, because if we export install function, Vue won't find it. So it has to be in an object. I promised you an example of subscription-based props. Here's an example from Final Forms library. As you can see, Ego is using slot scopes here, and he's using the. Do you know how scope slots work? Okay. If you focus on the final field component, you can see that it has a name, and it has we pass some validator function that will be used for validation, but actually we don't provide any support for the value of the field. So there are no events being passed or props that would be typically passed with the the props object coming from the scope slot. That's because under the hood, final field component uses a subscription. In the created lifecycle hook, final form is subscribing to some so-called final form is subscribing to some system of changes in the original library. Similar system used, for example, by Vue Apollo under the hood, where Vue Apollo subscribes to changes coming from GraphQL API. It usually involves using either a lot of watchers or RxJS observables. Of course, before we shut down the component, we still need to unsubscribe from the subscription. You can see that it looks very similar to global events in JavaScript. Another useful pattern that can be used to work with forms comes also from Vue Apollo library. We were talking about component options. When you create your own option, usually you start it with a $sign, so that you know that users know that it's not a part of original Vue.js API. It's a custom provided option. Here we're defining reactive setter. Reactive setter in Vue.js is the function that is a part of a reactivity system. Each reactive property in Vue.js uses custom getter and setter, and if a reactive property has such a setter, all other properties that use it as a dependency will be notified that such a change happened. So all our computed properties will be able to recompute. But what happens if you don't define your properties in data object or as a computed? What happens if you want to define them in your own separate option called, for example, Apollo? In such a case, you have to imitate the system used by Vue under the hood. Here we can see that it's basically an array of watchers for each property that we're defining in our custom option in our library. So if our library has a set of them, each one will register a separate watcher, and here the callback is actually pretty simple. We simply define we simply pass the value to property on the main scope of Vue, and such properties will basically work same way as if they were defined in data. So if you ever work on your own library, if you want to provide some additional features to each of the properties used by this library, you can use one of such patterns, either imitating reactive setters, like in Vue Apollo, or for example, using a class and defining all properties, the object of properties in data option as a class that provides some additional feature for each of these properties. Another useful pattern that you can take advantage of when working with forms is a custom setter for a computed property. Here you can see that the component has some model defined, and it usually comes from the props. So the computed field called field model actually doesn't change anything in the value of the prop. Simply because you can't directly change a computed property. You have to pass the information about the change you want to do to some external source. For example, Vuex. If you would write a getter that takes data from takes some value from Vuex state, then in the setter for such a property, you would pass this val argument to Vuex. And similarly, if this model comes from props, then you would emit an event that passes the value back to the parent. In this situation, we use a custom function instead of directly passing emitting an event like we use actually we emit three things. First is the input event to the parent component, which will change the original value. So this model will get updated and field model will get updated too. But on the way, we're doing two side effects. This emit touch, which is responsible for validation, in this emit, which will provide the way to communicate the user of our library that something happened. Such communication can be made with multiple ways. We can define a watcher in the parent component, and this way it would be actually user of our library that would have to write this watcher. So usually the better option is to do it ourselves by either bubbling events up to the root component of our library and back to the user, or directly dispatching actions or committing mutations to Vuex or using event bus. Here's an example of a system that can handle such situation. Our emit function, if user provided the name of a mutation we want to commit, we will commit this mutation. Similarly, we can dispatch an action store or bubble up the event with a custom name. This event is a prop that user can provide. If the user wants to be notified of a change on a particular field with, for example, change event, this event will provide the name change. Payload is represented by additional computed property, which can provide additional data about what actually happens in the form, together with the new value of this form. Short example of such a payload. We of course have name of our field, get path, which is another computed property. If our form is pretty complex, it can have multiple levels. By level of a form, I'm in a situation where when you buy a ticket for a plane and you have 2 kids, and you want to add data about both of these kids, you get dynamically generated 2 sets of form fields for each of the kids. So get path, the path in such situation would be representing the actual path to model object. Because data of the kids wouldn't be on the root level; it would be under the kids property with an array of objects for each of the kids. Such levels of the form can be represented by separate components that take care of, that provide layout and all the logic for fields in finally, model, our field model, which we talked about, and we can provide data about validation if we want to just provide a simple statement, either our field is valid or not, we can just do it. If we want to provide whole object of validation, we can pass an object from Vue.js or our own validation system. If we dynamically generate a form, each of the fields may have some unique properties. For example, one of the fields may have an icon, another field may have a different color, and if we just in a situation where we use a JSON schema for representing the forms, we need a way to handle it. Here's a simple way to do it, which would look better if we had an actual form field to show off with that takes advantage of this. You can see that we're assigning multiple levels of of properties, val, which represents the default presentation state of the component. If in our component template for a field, we define that there is no icon provided, then val won't have this field. But if we if the template if the template author decides that all fields, I'm sorry, it's difficult to explain without being able to show you actual templates, which I unfortunately can't do today. The interesting thing in this code is that we have separate options for so-called single element and multiple elements. Why I call them elements? In a template, when you want to pass a prop to a component that provides a template for a form field, it doesn't have to be one exact element. Like usually you would want to add a class to specific element in a component. For example, to input element. But sometimes if the field is more complex, for example, a date picker, you may want to pass separate props for each levels of the component. In this case, you can provide such options as an array. Each element, each object in an array would be representing the props you want and events you want to pass to particular element in a form component. I'm sorry, this was a bit embarrassing for all of us. I'm very happy that you stayed here, even if the presentation wasn't that good. I know some people left earlier. I hope they just had to run for their bus because they are working tomorrow.
It's worth it.
I hope I was able to teach you a little bit. Definitely you taught me a lot during this hour. As you can see, this presentation ends in a rather weird way. Few hours ago, I learned that most of the stuff I wanted to show you today, like the actual template components, which would show you on actual code examples why we actually set all this stuff. Because here you see some part of the schema logic, which actually doesn't exist if you rip it away from the template component. And since I can't show you the template components, I would if I write some basic templates when I came here, but suddenly the situation was that the presentation itself didn't want to run because of my laptop. Thank you very much, and enjoy the evening on the after party.
All's good.